Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to start out with, I want to lighten the mood for a second here, because I saw something on Facebook the other day that I want to share with you. That's a dangerous thing for someone to say. Hold on, let me find it. So this was a gun debate that was going on Facebook, and I stay out of all those kinds of things on Facebook, but I just thought this was hilarious. Someone said, "As a Brit, I find the whole notion of ever having the need to have a gun in the first place absolutely abhorrent." Someone responded, "As an American, I haven't had to care what you Brits say since 1776 when we forced you out with our guns." I just thought that was hilarious, and it really does represent something that is unique about this country, and that is that the gun and the ownership and our right to bear arms was enshrined in our founding documents. And that's because gun culture has been part of the American experience since the very beginning. And it's certainly how we bought our freedom, how we fought for and got our freedom to begin with. But it's also how we've preserved it, and we've preserved our safety. And all of us have the right to arm ourselves and defend ourselves, our home and our families. And I choose to arm myself as a citizen, and I thank God that I have that right. I would not want to live in a country where the government could tell me, you don't have the right to arm yourself and defend your family. That would be a terrible place, and I certainly hope that we never forget our history. I think Senator Morell's right. We can't forget our history. We can't forget the principles that we relied upon to build this nation, and guns and the right to bear arms is fundamental to those principles and to those rights, and it's really the one that protects all the others. So a little bit about myself, just a quick intro. I'm the district attorney. I've been the district attorney now for about 4 years. Before that, I was a line prosecutor. I came up through the DA's office. Just a little bit about my history with guns and the Second Amendment. My father was a police officer, so he was a police officer at the LA Sheriff's Department during the Watts riots. It was his rookie year. And then he came out, was a police officer in Palm Springs, where he spent the majority of his law enforcement career. It's where I was born, out in the Coachella Valley. When I was about 4 years old, my dad left the Palm Springs Police Department, and he took a job as a marshal in Wyoming. A lot of people don't know this. So he moved us to rural Wyoming, and a marshal's sort of something like a sheriff, but a game warden too, something like that in Wyoming. So he had one deputy, by the way. So it was my dad and one deputy. And you know, where we lived, we spent about 5 years living out there in rural Wyoming. Where we lived, everybody had firearms. And I got my first gun when I was 9 years old. I think today that would seem like to some like child abuse, and I'm sure that we'd get reported. But it was different. Like the sheriff, I learned about gun safety and how to use firearms from my dad. And you know, one of the things I want to mention before I kind of get into the meat of what I want to talk about is we've lost that. We've lost that passing on of knowledge from father to son about firearms, how to use them safely. Most kids nowadays, their familiarity with firearms comes from video games, and they're learning the exact wrong lessons from those video games. And so that emphasis on gun safety and how to be a responsible gun owner and gun user, that's just as much part of our history as the rights to bear arms. And so that's the part that I think we have to get back to. Young people need to learn about guns and gun safety and go to the range. There are 300 million guns in this country. No one's ever going to take our guns away. I'm just going to tell you that right now. There's 300 million. So let's learn to use them safely. Let's learn to use guns the way they were intended to use them. So I want to talk just quickly about some of the gun laws. The DA's office, by the way, we handle about 60,000 criminal cases a year. We are the prosecutor's office for Riverside County, and we get the criminal cases from all of the agencies, from the Sheriff's Department, which obviously is the largest law enforcement agency, but then also from the police departments, city police departments, CHP, and on, and sometimes from our federal law enforcement agencies as well. However, the DA's office is not primarily responsible for gun regulation. That's the job of the California Department of Justice. And so we're not regulating the purchase and transfer of firearms. We're concerned with the criminal law. So to put that in a different way, my concern primarily is with criminals. And I am very concerned when criminals use guns, because that is dangerous to the public. But the focus should be on criminals. And I spoke recently at a forum called Gun Violence Forum. And what my message essentially is we got to focus on the violence. The problem is our people, violent people, criminals, that are seeking to harm other citizens. That's the problem. So by focusing on the guns is a it's appealing to some to say we have a gun problem in this country. The problem is not the guns. The problem is the underlying criminality, and that's what our office goes after. Think about this: when you think about gun crimes, if you want to call them that, crimes committed with firearms, something like more than 70%, sometimes some estimates as high as 80% of those crimes are committed by gang members. So again, the problem is not the firearm, it is the gang member who's committing a crime. And we've got to keep that straight. And at the DA's office, we keep that straight. We spend tremendous resources going after gangs and criminals and people that are breaking the law. The problem is not guns, it's law breaking. It's the lack of law abiding in certain individuals. So to focus on law abiding citizens and try to take their guns away is not only unconstitutional, but it's counterproductive. It's not going to make us any safer. And I said that at that forum that I spoke to a couple weeks ago. It was a different crowd, and that I wasn't received very well. But nonetheless, I like to go and speak to all citizens because they need to hear the truth. And if they don't like it, that's okay. But they need to hear the truth of the matter, which is, the more we spend time talking about or making it harder for law-abiding citizens to buy guns, the less we're focusing on the real problem. And it's really seductive, I think, to say, well, the problem is guns, because to say the problem is criminality it's a much harder thing to solve, isn't it? I mean, you have to really think about, well, what's wrong with society? What's wrong with our society that we're producing gang members that want to go hurt other citizens? That's a much harder thing. And so you've got lawmakers that throw up, well, it's the guns, and it's easy, and it's enticing, but it's not true. And it's not the way that we're going to keep ourselves safe. Frustrations with Sacramento. I'm very frustrated with Sacramento, and let me just give you some examples of what I'm talking about. And look, I'm not the district attorney. I don't get to make the law. I respect Sacramento, that we have a division of powers in our system, federal system and state system. So the laws are made by the legislature or by the citizens directly through the initiative process, and the district attorney's office enforces those laws. And so I'm very careful about, criticizing too much what's going on in Sacramento. That's their business, and I try to give them some deference. However, I do have to say that when they're making our job harder, and some of the hypocrisy that goes on up there, I do sort of need to comment. Recent changes in the laws have made it harder for district attorneys and the sheriff and police chiefs to enforce the law and keep the citizens safe. And so when that happens, I do speak out, because, and I know Senator Morell feels the same way, we've got to tell the truth to the citizens, and hopefully, eventually, the citizens of this state will wake up. Let me give you some examples of recent changes in the law. Felony assault with a firearm under a Proposition 57, which was approved by voters, was changed or was considered a nonviolent offense. Felony assault with a firearm, nonviolent in California. Felony assault with a deadly weapon upon a peace officer or firefighter. In California, nonviolent. Felony discharge of a firearm. In California, that's considered a nonviolent crime. Felony discharge of a firearm from a motor vehicle, nonviolent. Recently, the legislature passed SB 620, which amended 12022.5. You don't need to worry about the numbers, but that is a gun enhancement. The way a gun enhancement works is it says if you commit a crime, robbery, rape, you name it, and you use a gun, there's going to be an additional penalty. The way the law was in the past is that penalty was automatic. It was mandatory. It means if you committed that crime and you used a gun, you got an extra sentence of years in prison. The legislature, at the same time that they're railing on guns and talking about the problem with guns in this state, they lessened the penalty for criminals using guns. So you can't have it both ways, I say to the legislature. You can't have it both ways. You're either going to be concerned about gun crimes or you're not. And if you are, then give us the tools to protect the citizens by punishing those who commit crimes using guns. It's really simple as that. But they did the opposite. They made it so that these punishments would no longer be mandatory and a judge could basically waive the punishment. The purpose of that is to shorten the time that some of these criminals spend in prison and in jail. That's the real goal. So yes, I'm frustrated with Sacramento. And I try to be respectful, but we need to wake up. And that's why I happily agreed to speak here, because just like I try to go everywhere to speak to citizens that have concerns, we've got to wake up as a state and think about public safety and think about how to enforce the rule of law. That's the key. So I'll close with this. So the one thing we do at the DA's office that does involve guns, and that is we have a task force called the Gang Impact Team, and they focus on criminal street gangs. They focus on the high-level stuff. We're not doing street enforcement. We're trying to infiltrate cartels and local gangs. And if you don't know, the cartels are responsible for the vast majority of the drug trade, which comes from Mexico primarily. And the local gangs serve as their distribution network. But they also run guns. And that's what we're finding. And they're prolific gun runners. And so we're going after these criminals. They're selling guns, obviously illegally. Many times the serial numbers are scratched out. These are stolen guns. Sometimes they're purchased legally and then illegally transferred to gang members. That does happen as well. But it's big business, and you have to be aware of that. That the gangs, the cartels, they're not just selling and running the narcotics business in Riverside County. They're also in the gun selling and trading and smuggling business. So it's very dangerous. And when we take down some of these gangs and we find the high-powered firearms that they have and that they've amassed, you have to think that that's what law enforcement is facing. The sheriff's deputies are out there enforcing the law every day, and that's what they're facing, a well-armed, heavily armed criminal street gang. That's the reality. That's the tough job that law enforcement has today. So again, I would say let's keep it straight. Let's be honest with the citizens. The problem is lawbreakers, gangs, cartels that heavily arm themselves. That's the problem. And as long as we continue to, and I'm going to tell that truth as long as I'm your district attorney, if we focus on that and try to get Sacramento to refocus on the real problem, we can start making some changes and make it better. As long as we continue to lie to ourselves, as long as we continue to tell ourselves that we could solve our criminal problems, our gang problems by focusing on guns, then we're never going to get to the real issue. And that's really the heart of the problem.